The sun came up just like any other day.
Greetings, you're listening to Cantus Firmus at the Movies. We're talking about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the 2004 film directed by Michel Gondry and written by Charlie Kaufman. And I have here with me Latifah Alattas, who is a musical artist, writer, producer, and engineer. And she's been involved in a lot of different projects, but Modaspira and Page CXVI. I've always said CXVI. Should I actually spell it the number?
No, actually, I say CXVI, so you're doing great.
Okay, and Page CXVI is kind of an odd name, but the idea behind that was that the band was named after a page in your edition of the Chronicles of Narnia. What was the first?
Magician's Nephew.
The Magician's Nephew.
Yeah.
Okay, and it has to do with the page where Aslan speaks Narnia into existence. Is that right? Or sings Narnia into existence.
He sings it, yeah. Which I love the idea of God using melody to kind of call creation into being. I thought that was really cool. Yeah,
and so can you tell me a little bit about some of the musical projects that you've been involved in? Because you sort of came on my radar a few years ago, and I was really, especially love the CXVI stuff because of my interest in hymns, but the way it was kind of updated was really cool, and I haven't been shy about my not being a very big fan of a lot of contemporary worship music, so I really love what you guys were doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I originally was a solo artist under the moniker Tifa, which is kind of a nickname I have. And then that kind of converted into a band called the Autumn Film. And then the Autumn Film existed for many years. And then Page CXVI started as three of us from the Autumn Film. And we kind of just had two different bands with different trajectories. It was all the same musicians. And then about, 7 or 8 years ago now, the guys kind of stepped away from actively being in the band, and I kind of let Autumn Film die and started Modaspira for kind of my personal writing and storytelling as a songwriter, and then just started touring and doing stuff for Page on my own. And then I actually have a new Page 6i record that I'm getting mixed at the end of March that will be coming out hopefully by the end of spring.
Is it just sort of an additional volume, or is it like one of the thematic albums? Or
it's just going to be a new record. I have written a ton of original content for it. I have 2 hymns on it that are repurposed, but the rest are original, and I'm pretty excited about it. It's still in the same kind of space as the other records, but I haven't put out a Page record in almost 7 years, so. Yeah. It feels really exciting to have something new come out. And now Page 6i is actually just me. I have a bunch of players playing on the record with me, a ton of strings, but it is now officially a band of one.
Oh, wow. Well, you said it was just you. I imagine maybe like Prince, where he goes in and records all the instruments.
I wish I was that talented. Yeah.
All right. Well, awesome. I'm really excited to get that record. If people did want to check out some of your stuff, where would they go to do that?
So I'm on all audio platforms online, so Spotify, Apple Music, but you could also go to modaspira.com, that's MODASPIRA, for my personal songwriting stuff, and then Page CXVI, which is 116 in Roman numerals for everybody that's wondering. It's literally Page, PAGE, CXVI.com, or you can just look up either of those monikers anywhere you like to listen to music.
Wonderful. Awesome. Okay, so now the film, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. This film came out, I think, when I was in high school, and it was, I think, the perfect time to watch this film, probably, being in high school, which, how old were you when this came out?
I graduated from college in 2004.
Okay.
So I was 21, 22 when the film came out.
Still pretty good time, because I guess I was 18, so.
Yeah.
What was it about this film that, I guess, really spoke to you? And when I, talked to you about doing this podcast, this was, I think, one of the first ones you'd mentioned as one you'd be interested in doing. So what was the significance, remaining significance of it for you?
Yeah, I have loved this film since it came out. It has always been kind of one of my benchmark films for many reasons. One, I love how Michel Gondry directs things. It feels like otherworldly. It feels like rooted in reality. but like mystical and dreamlike at the same time. And I remember being really wooed by the music, by the score. And this is the first time I remember being exposed to John Bryan, who did the score for this film. He also did Lady Bird. It's like a more recent film if people have seen that, which is also a great film. But John Bryan is maybe one of my favorite film scores ever. Hans Zimmer obviously is a classic, but there's something really human about the way he scores his films. And I remember instinctively loving how the music really emoted the moment that was happening in the movie. And at the time, so when I first saw this, I was very much in love with my first boyfriend. His name was Aaron. And I remember thinking like, this is awesome. It's about how these two people are like cosmically drawn to each other, even though it's sort of tragic, but look at them try again. And isn't this beautiful? And then when my first boyfriend and I inevitably broke up, as most first boyfriend and first girlfriends do, what was really interesting is that my ex-boyfriend actually looked really similar to the way Jim Carrey looks in the film, kind of like that tall, lanky, kind of shaggy brown hair, big brown eyes kind of thing. And I remember after we broke up, it was about, a year or so after we had gotten out of college. I remember watching this film on repeat and just bawling my eyes out. And it was, I had a new lens to look at the film with. And, as I've watched it, I probably watch it about once every year or two since then, just because I think it's so interesting and compelling. And obviously I got married and then I have been divorced now for over a year. And the film just continues to speak to me in new and different ways. I think that Charlie Kaufman wrote a nearly perfect script is what I feel like. But yeah, man, I mean, what were your feelings when you first watched it?
Gosh, it's been so long. There's, I guess what's interesting to me is what one could get out of it depending on where one is. Because I think at the time there were a lot of people who were interested in it who I think saw themselves as, very kind of emotionally deep artistic types and maybe weren't necessarily, maybe they were just emotionally damaged in some way. But that's not like really the only way to watch the film though. Cause I think I probably was a little bit that way when I first saw it. And so there may have been, that was maybe how I saw it a little bit, the love that's so deep or whatever. But watching it now, I kind of looked at the characters and thought they probably shouldn't be in this relationship.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how much of that is, age or just becoming a little more cynical. We'll get into the plot in a little bit, but this whole sort of this thing of whether or not they're going to keep repeating this cycle, like this sort of Sisyphus sort of, rolling the rock up the hill. And the film ends so optimistically, and it's hard not to be drawn into this whole thing of, them willing to be going to kind of go through this whole process again because of how they feel about each other. But there's also a part of you that goes, no, don't.
Yeah.
Work out your issues at least first before you try this again.
Yeah.
But I'd like to, maybe kind of work through all those things as we sort of talk about the film a little bit more. But the style, though, the kind of fantasy rooted in reality thing, I think you're right. It brought to mind a film that I saw a few years ago. There was a German film by Fassbinder called World on a Wire that I think kind of predated The Matrix, and The Matrix I think maybe stole some of its themes and visual cues. But it's the same sort of thing where everything, feels kind of, real and almost drab, but there's also this sort of strange fantasy world that's happening within this drab kind of scenario. And that's what this sort of feels like, because they're doing this, what seems like it would be this, hugely advanced kind of process of wiping parts of your memory away. But in this process, they're recording cassette tapes of like that's part of the process of like finding your memories as you record this cassette tape, and you're like, so there's a part of it that feels like, okay, this doesn't seem quite realistic, because you'd have to imagine this is happening in some world far away where they've worked this whole thing out, but it's not. It's rooted in this moment that they're making the film. You sort of accept the fantasy aspect because it does feel sort of grounded in a way.
Yeah.
But the basic idea of the film, I'm going to give kind of a brief plot outline, and we'll go into all the spoilers. So if you haven't seen it, you should before you listen. Is that so? This Joel Barish character, played by Jim Carrey, he's this shy, sort of a nebbish kind of guy, and then in contrast, Clementine is this free spirit. I think the trope that gets discussed is the manic pixie dream girl kind of character, and they meet on a train from Montauk and quickly take up a relationship. But what they don't realize is that they've actually dated before for 2 years, but had wiped each other from their memories. And they used this company called Lacuna to do so after kind of a bad breakup. Although it seems to have been one that he thought they were going to rebound from, but she's this kind of extreme person who they have a bad fight, and then she decides to go wipe him completely from her mind. So Jim Carrey's the Joel Barish character. The Clementine character is played by Kate Winslet. Kirsten Dunst, who I think was pretty much on the map at this point, plays the receptionist for Lacuna named Mary, and a fairly young Mark Ruffalo and Elijah Wood are these two technicians. So they factor in pretty significantly as well. What's really going to come out in this film are, I think, different themes of, I think particularly this idea of grief and how we cope with it, which, I think for me is, significant because, I mean, like all humans, I've had relationships and I've had loss, and I've also been divorced. But, as you watch the film, you sort of feel, I think you mourn a little bit with Jim Carrey's character, this death of this relationship, because in a lot of ways, a serious relationship ending does feel like a death. I mean, I know with me, even I guess before the divorce, when I just kind of knew that it was going that way, I just kind of remember walking around feeling like I was in a daze. It was like almost hard to believe, that this thing that was so significant in my life is going away, and that is like a death,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've all wondered, could we go back, and if we could go back, would we not do it? Or if it were possible to wipe that person from our brain, would we do that?
Yeah.
And so this film takes that thought experiment seriously and does it. So I kind of wondered, maybe what you thought about this whole idea of, would that be something that would be worth doing if you could do it, to wipe that experience from your brain?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't think I'd wipe my first boyfriend, Aaron. We were best friends. We had a lot of fun. I remember we laughed a lot. And we broke up. It was the right thing. And he married a girl. I think they're still married. I don't really keep up. We don't stay really in touch, but, and it's been a long time now since that relationship ended. And then as far as my ex-husband, so I was asking myself the question, would I erase this relationship from my mind? And, at the risk of sounding too honest, I think I would choose to not have had that relationship. And not because, my ex-husband's some monster or whatever. There are hard realities when you're divorcing. There's hard realities that lead to divorce. I think for me, the difference when I think about like the end of my marriage versus like the end of my first relationship, I really only have had two significant like loves in that way. Is that, obviously there's a time investment that's much longer in my second one. We were together, basically dated and married for about 12 years and married for almost 9. And I just don't know, honestly, if the cost of how it all ended and where I am in my life now is worth the benefit, like the good parts of the relationship, because it wasn't all bad. That's for sure. And most relationships start really well, which is why you get involved in the first place. There's attraction and romance and like, all the things. And there are good memories. Like when you're watching Joel Barish kind of like navigate down like the kind of the maze of his memories, to like, what I love about the film is it ends with it kind of goes sequentially backwards, right? It ends with like his very first memory of meeting her, because they're kind of chasing down the memories to erase them, and they start with the most current. And you see like it starts out hard and you're kind of watching it and you're like, oh man, I totally get why these people have broken up. They're kind of like, all they do is fight, and they seem to have contempt for each other and like all these things. And then as you start to get to the middle part of the relationship where there's just a lot of intimacy because they've already had like some time spent. And then you get to the beginning of the relationship, which is exciting and fun and interesting. You kind of understand why they ended up together. But as I've been doing that, like with myself, it's like any people or like anybody would do, you sort of Rolodex through your memories when something ends. I don't know, man. I mean, I think the truth is, I learned a lot from my marriage. I learned things from my ex-husband that were of value. I don't want to say that didn't happen. I'm not sure right now. And maybe it's that I'm too close to ground zero still.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it was worth the pain.
Yeah.
And that's just how I just want to be truthful about it. I think like that what people want to hear is that like, oh no, like no matter what, it was worth it. I learned a lot. It made me a part of who I am. I just don't know if I feel that way right now.
No, that makes sense. I get it.
What about you?
I feel like for me, there's a large part in which I have put that away somewhere else in my brain.
Sure.
And there is something about that that's kind of sad because if I think about it, I can maybe stir those memories up, and every so often I'll have a little piece of one that comes up. But there's so much that I don't remember at all, and I think it's maybe because of my the way I am, or I'm just kind of a forgetful person. But I don't think that's entirely it. I feel like I've kind of subconsciously put a lot of that stuff away, and there is something about even that I find sort of tragic. That there's so much of my life that I don't really have access to, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do, but I don't. On my day to day, it feels like I'm kind of living in this moment, and the things that maybe happened after the divorce, I can access pretty well. But all that sort of stuff, those years we were together, I don't have as clear access to. And I think sometimes maybe that's something you have to do to move forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think about something a counseling professor I had, Dr. Andrew Graham, who I'd had on the podcast a few episodes ago, and we were talking in class about the kind of the trigger warning kind of movement that's kind of come up, and he'd said that ultimately the goal of counseling was the opposite, that you're not trying to remove triggers that spark anxiety, but you're trying to reframe what happened to you in a different way, to see it from a new perspective. And I think, for Christians in particular, that often means that we see our tragedies in a new light, the sort of light of God who can redeem anything according to his purposes. And that's still true, although it would, there's this kind of life-affirming thing that everything that happens to you is worthwhile, but I don't know that I believe that entirely either. I mean,
I can't buy into that. I think that's really problematic theologically and interpersonally.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree. Well, and I think I think it encourages bad decision making too, because I think at the end of the day we do want to say, hey, we want, this is good if I've learned from it, or this is good if I can get something good out of it. But maybe the decision itself wasn't the right one, and maybe in future I should make better decisions and encourage other people to make better decisions. Mm-hmm. But if we all thought like that, this movie wouldn't have been made, because it's about a relationship that probably shouldn't have happened if they were making good decisions, because ultimately what attracts him to her is kind of her unhinged, approach to life, where she just sort of does what she wants to do in the moment. And that can be very attractive, of course, but it's also probably not a good grounds for building a serious long-term relationship on. And there is this whole question that's unclear in the film of whether she's cheating on him, because he seems to think she is, but it's never, I guess, confirmed legitimately, but it makes sense a little bit for her character that she would be, Yeah. And so, it's the ending is sweet in a way, because they're willing they care about each other enough that they're willing to venture back into it and give it a try despite the pain. And there's some value in that, right? I mean, that's any relationship.
There is something whimsical about the heart wants what the heart wants. And there is something whimsical about, and that I think in healthy people, opposites attracting can actually be incredibly beneficial to the formation of who you are. But if you have two people that are deeply unhealthy, kind of in essence using each other to not feel how they want to feel. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that's where it can get kind of problematic. So it's like, on one hand, I love the idea of there are just certain people you are attracted to no matter what. And the idea that you will be coming together to have whatever kind of course of relationship that you should have. There's something comforting in that. At the same time, like, you could kind of poke holes in it, because it's like, I don't really believe there's one person for everyone, because if one person chooses the wrong person, the whole system gets off kink, you know what I mean? And so then everybody's screwed. So I don't necessarily believe that either. I think there's so many different people that you could be good matches with that would be like beneficial to grow with and learn from. And then I think there are a lot of people, honestly, that we maybe are attracted to because we're trying to work out wounded or broken narratives from our past. And so we're kind of like, find somebody subconsciously, emotionally, that we can kind of rework that narrative that's like has the same dysfunction. And we're like trying to, in essence, sort of see if we can play it out and get a better ending or a better result. And I think like the nuance, if it ends up being good or bad, is so dependent on if both people are pursuing health and honesty, you know? And it's really actually hard to find people that are doing that, like, sincerely. So, that's why this film is so interesting, is because, like, it's a no-brainer they're attracted to each other. It's a no-brainer that, like, they love to spend time together. But, like, my question is, like, well, you know, they sort of touch on his relationship with his mom. You know what I mean? Like, she kind of seems like she loves to hang out with friends. She's, like, I think smoking a cigarette in that scene where he's under the table, you know, and, like, Clementine or Kate Winslet, you know, is wearing this, like, fabulous 60s dress, and she's got her red-orange hair and those big kind of go-go boots. And she's, like, trying to comfort him under the table. And what's really clear is that, like, all he wants is for his mom to pick him up and give him attention. But she's, like, kind of too busy talking to her friends and living her life and all those things. And so, like, the idea that, like, he would, like, look for somebody that would, like, he'd have to fight to keep her attention, right? Like, one of her big complaints about him is that he's boring, you know, which means he doesn't keep her attention. Like, maybe he's reworking that same narrative of, I can't keep my mom's attention. Maybe I can try to keep this person's attention. I mean, it's just sort of the nuance of that. I don't know if Charlie Kaufman intended for that, but I think that's sort of interesting. You know?
That is interesting. Well, yeah, and it kind of brings to mind, you know, sort of these Freudian tropes of, you know, the mother and child relationship or father and child relationship, and seeing looking at his mom, looking at his mom's legs from under a table or something. I don't know, something weird. I don't know what Freud would make of that, but but that is an interesting thing. I didn't really think about how that was factoring into kind of who he was, but that does make a lot of sense, that who you are at that young age has an impact. Because it is hard to kind of work out his psychology because he is more introverted. But I almost want to watch this again and sort of look at the flashbacks and try to piece together who he is from that.
Yeah, like that scene too where he's like, he doesn't want to kill that bird with a hammer. And he's like surrounded by like those little boys who are his peers at the time, you know? And they're like, do it. And like, you realize that he's somebody who succumbs to pressure, like a lot of people do, especially peer pressure. But he'll do things he doesn't want to do based on the pressure from an outside person. So it's also interesting that he chooses a female who's like pretty dominant and like puts a lot of pressure on him. Like even when they first show the first scenes of the movie where they're meeting and she's like, I want you to stay. We're going to get married. I want you to call me. Like she just like pushes and pushes until he does the things that she wants. Like he's repeating that pattern, you know? And
he says something too, like in his head and he's writing in his journal that he almost like these, like, you know, why do I fall in love with anybody who smiles at me or something like that?
Yeah, exactly.
So you know that he like likes her a lot, but he doesn't like, he's not at all receptive to like her trying to get close to him or talk to him. So it's like, well, what's going on with you, dude? But yeah, she kind of forces her way in on that. Yeah. And I think the thing you said about reworking kind of traumas from our past and our relationships, it does make a lot of sense in this film because essentially they decide that's what they're going to do again.
Over and over and over.
Yeah. There is this, I think, question that I think we can work through, which is what are romantic relationships or what are marriage or what is love really supposed to look like? And I think we've scratched the surface a little bit, but I think one thing that we've kind of hinted at is this idea that there should be wisdom involved in this, and not just this feeling of attraction. I think we've sort of made that sacrosanct, that if you're attracted to this person, that's who you should be with, and we see it in films a lot. And I think about especially like a lot of Hollywood films, or like Woody Allen films, which I kind of grew up watching a lot of, but they're always about somebody who's in a relationship with somebody and they're getting bored with it, and then they decide to go after something that seems a little more exciting. And that somehow is a justification in and of itself. Right. But we make excuses when something else comes along that seems for the moment more exciting.
Yeah, we sure do.
So we repeat those patterns. Yeah.
I think some people, for whatever reason, succumb to that, and some people don't. And maybe it's a question of loyalty or pride or selfishness or honesty, or there's so many different ways to look at it. But I do think anything long term that has longevity, like romantically, has to weather those storms of when people kind of get bored or tired and discouraged, and then have to like renew and fight for like rekindling a flame. I know a lot of people who are married. And if I'm being super frank, I think I know probably a couple, maybe 3, definitely 2 I can think of now, that are still as much in love today as they were when they first met. And most couples I know, even like the really healthy, cool marriages, I think they've had seasons where they've had to like work really hard, and then there's a few people I know that are married that I think you should maybe not be married. You're bringing out the worst in each other, and it's not getting better, and it keeps happening, and that's just the truth. I believe in marriage. I think it's a beautiful commitment, and I think it's something that stretches us and pushes us. And if people are like soberly and consensually like choosing it in their right mind and have good support, like why not? You know what I mean? But I also, even just statistically, like relationships end, a lot of them do. And as to why and how we do it, maybe that's what matters, But yeah, I think that like the cosmic meant for each other thing, or even the cosmic, I need to keep working out this narrative until I get the answer or the result that I want. It's just part of like the human plight of being on Earth,
Yeah. Well, with that whole thing about needing to make it work, or having that desire that, I have to be able, wanting to make it work. I'm going to go at it knowing that it's going to be work, and that I'm going to have to do that if I want this to work. I think you have to sort of set out saying, this is a value enough to me that I'm going to do that. Yeah. But it doesn't also hurt to choose to be with somebody who you're more likely to be able to work things out with, as opposed to just somebody that you're attracted to, and that's it.
Yeah. And like lucky is the person that gets both those things checked off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the ideal marriage. You actually like the person, and they're as committed to it as you are.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a constant negotiation, constant conversation, constant like commitment. It's something, it can't be stagnant. It has to continually be renewed and refreshed.
And so kind of getting back to this whole, would you erase it or would you not do it thing, there is this aspect of the film about event shaping who we are. Yeah. And what's interesting to me is that they wipe each other from their memories, but they almost seem to be going around with this like sort of hole that's there, where it's like everything that's kind of been built on, this relationship and who they are and who they've changed as people, they're still the same people they were before they went in there. It's just now they don't seem to know why.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That like the emotional result is still there, but they have no idea what the cause is. I didn't think about that. That's kind of fascinating. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, yeah, man, if I could have the benefit of the emotional wisdom from what I've learned and not have the trauma of the memories, then I definitely would erase it.
Well, but I guess the question is the trauma gone? because the memory may be gone, but is the trauma still there? Is there still this sort of mark on them because of what they've experienced? It's just, I don't know. It sort of feels like, sometimes when you have a terrible memory that you suppress, but you sort of go on as if you do remember it, like you're still, afraid of people or afraid of circumstances that bring that, that are similar. But yeah, that does. I mean, especially with the way he reacts to her, because when they first meet, it's different than when they meet again for the first time. He seems a lot more wary of her, even though he is not really supposed to remember her.
That's interesting. Well, I actually, I really believe, and a lot of people do, that we carry trauma inside our body, like inside our organs and muscles and the tissues that create our form. As well as our memories, like our emotional and intellectual memories, I mean, I've done a ton of body work in the last year that's been so healing and so helpful for me. And it's made me realize how much stuff I actually carry in my body. Like when I'm there's one spot in my shoulder and one spot in my hip that I think I carry some of my pain in, whenever I'm rolling it out on a foam roller. I feel really emotional for some reason. I just have to let it go. But if I'm doing it on the other side, I feel fine, and so I just, it's one of the things I'm asking God about and talking through. And my strategy now has been, as I'm rolling out those places, I just kind of say what I'm feeling to kind of release it, And so, yeah, I think that there is something to be said for I don't think you can really, I mean, this is all a mythological question anyways, but if it was possible, could we actually erase it all? Probably not, because I think we carry memories in other places just besides our brains.
Yeah. Were you like me? I wonder how you felt watching the film. When you watch a film and you're experiencing the emotions vicariously that the characters are feeling, did you feel a greater sense of loss for Joel as he's experiencing the end of the relationship, or as he's experiencing her disappearing from his memories? Because I sort of feel like the emotional weight of the film is that loss of memory as opposed to the loss of the relationship.
Yeah, if I'm being honest, my response is more to the losing of the memories, especially that last one where they're in the house, or second to last one, they're at the house on the beach where she breaks in and she's looking for alcohol. And she wants him to stay, but he's too anxious to stay. So he leaves, and he says, "I wish I hadn't have left." And she says, "Well, let's at least make up a goodbye," And he's buried what is it, waist deep in sand, which is sort of interesting, metaphor for being stuck, And that's one of the saddest parts of the film for me. That, and then the memory of when they're in the bookstore. And she kind of gives him his speech, I'm just I'm looking for my own peace of mind. You just got to let me be who I am. If you're going to be with me, you got to be with me. And he was like, I remember that speech so well. And they kind of had this dialogue about that moment of their relationship, and both those two spots in the film and the way John Bryan scores it right then is so brilliant, because it feels like a memory. It feels sad. It feels whimsical. It feels romantic. But you hear sadness and loss in the score. And those are the two spots where I feel the most sad in the film. There's places where I feel disturbed. But that's where I feel the most sad. Yeah. And those are about losing a memory where he wished he had done something different, because I think we all have that. And then a memory that was kind of beautiful and sweet and ignited something, Yeah. It's making me think of all my memories with my ex-husband that would I choose to erase that? It's just such an interesting question.
Yeah. It's a tough question too, because I think some people probably go into it with a very clear feeling about it, but it is actually, I don't know. I think I would, maybe the unhealthy thing I've done of locking it away is working well enough for me that I don't feel like I need to actually physically erase it. But
right.
But I think too, I have this kind of professorial brain, I think, a little bit, where I have a tendency to forget things that I'm in the moment. And sometimes that's very frustrating, because I have a tendency to forget things that actually would be kind of important to me. And there's something scary about that, especially as you think about maybe the possibility of getting older and memory slipping, and how frustrating that is.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I mean, how scary it is.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's like one of most people's greatest fears would be like dementia or Alzheimer's, where it's like your body's there, but your memories are kind of gone, you know? So you don't, without memories, we don't really have a frame of reference for who we are.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, yeah, it's interesting. I think it also is kind of interesting. I think that the question, like, would you erase, can only really be answered by people who have had painful breakups.
Yeah.
Like, because if you haven't had painful breakups, for either that you've only had one that's been successful, or you've had none, or maybe you've had breakups and they've all been really amicable and positive, the question isn't as meaningful, because you're not weighing the same amount of trauma or risk, you know? And so, whether she's just reactive and extreme is one question, but the truth is they both did it, and they probably both did it because there was a tremendous amount of pain and frustration, but God, it's such a good movie, man. I'm so glad this is the one we did.
Well, so, and I had another thought as we were kind of talking, which is there's definitely these questions of what's really happening, because they sort of have their own perspectives and you don't always get to it. But I don't ever remember seeing a memory that felt like it was maybe just how that character was remembering it. Because the thing about memory is it's not necessarily like a film camera, you don't, the way you remember it isn't necessarily how it happened. And I have to tell myself that all the time when I think about embarrassing things I did when I was 8 that I still haven't forgotten, is that it didn't happen quite how I remembered it. It wasn't, it was, nobody else probably remembers me, making a fool of myself or whatever.
Exactly.
But that is an interesting thing in the film, is because the memories that are there, I think for the most part, are presented kind of prima facie, like this is just the way it happened. And it would have been interesting maybe to sort of see how they might have looked at those memories differently, or if they had experienced those memories differently.
Totally. The one thing I do love, though, that like Michel Gondry does really well, is like that scene in the bookstore that I was talking about, where she's giving her speech. As she like disappears, all of a sudden all the books are white, like you no longer see titles, And I think about like how we remember things. We don't necessarily remember like we remember color washes, or we remember how we felt, or remember what it smelled like. But the what I like about like what Michel Gondry does is there's a lot of like disappearing of detail, like as she disappears, which I think is kind of fascinating, because I think that's more of how we remember. And then there are a few moments where it feels like the perspective is from Joel Barish's eyes versus like just an overlooking camera. And I mean, if we did the whole movie like that, it would be really fatiguing, right? It'd be like Cloverfield all over again, and I'd hate it. But like, I feel like I get what you're saying. Like, how we remember isn't always accurate. It's like you have your memories, the other person has their memories, and then there's the actual truth of like what happens, And but maybe it's more about what we remember than what actually happened, because it's what we remember that really shapes us.
Yeah, it's how it impacted us, not actually necessarily what happened.
Yeah.
And maybe that brings me back to that kind of point I made earlier, which is if therapy or counseling or whatever, the goal of that is to recontextualize what happened to us. I mean, maybe keeping in mind the fact that the way our brain records it isn't necessarily exactly what happened, but it's whatever was significant for us. I wonder if that gives us more permission to reframe trauma and negative events, knowing that it's not like we're necessarily being less honest with ourselves because we're putting it in this new context or new perspective. It's just we're just doing what we do automatically, but we're doing it deliberately.
Yeah, it's like it's not just emotional survival; it's like emotional strategy.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I like that.
And I think that maybe does go back to this also. I think ties in with this theme of being deliberate about the choices we make in our relationships as well. I think we have this tendency to feel like it's artificial or fake if we do anything but let the heart lead us and sort of do dramatic, spontaneous things.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's true.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like, just like acknowledging too that like, just like straight attraction, like chemical attraction is a bit of a spectrum, like I know maybe one or two men I've met in my whole life, and I meet lots of different men, where I have just had that kind of undeniable chemical response where you're like, I have no idea why I am so enthralled with this human being that's in the same room with me, but like I know their presence in the room. If I could and it wasn't weird, I would just stare at them the whole time, like all that stuff. And then there's men I've met who have been like, oh, they're an attractive person. I like them. I want to get to know them. Maybe we're just meant to be friends, but something about them I feel like I'm gravitating towards. And then there's people I feel indifferent about, and maybe we still become friends. And then there's people that I'm like, you're just not for me, And I think sometimes like we think that the only relationships worth having are those like intense chemical attraction relationships. But I think most relationships with good people can be developed into something beautiful, whether it be friendship to romance. And I think that there's something for us in the different kind of relationships we have, and I'm so grateful for the friends I've had in my life and have now, because they've been such a consistent source of goodness for me. And now that the one relationship that I thought was going to be permanent is no longer permanent, my friendships have become even more of like a foundational element in my life. I realize, that maybe already just on the basis of my age, there are friends that I will always have longer, and that have been around longer. And I think that one thing is sort of interesting in the film that isn't addressed a lot are like, who are their friends? You kind of meet Joel Barish's friends at the beginning who took him to the picnic where he meets Clementine for the first time. And there's that scene where he's talking with them and they don't know how to like tell him that they got this letter that she erased him from his brain. And that's how he learns about Lacuna. And like, they seem like pretty okay friends, but like, you just kind of learn like, they seem sort of isolated, like in their relationship. And even like Mary, who she's the reason she blows the lid off the operation, is because she's been in love with Howard. Isn't that his name? The doctor?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And she keeps doing it. She keeps erasing her memory. And like, part of me is like, man, if these people all had better friends, like maybe they'd be doing okay. Maybe they could cope and process better, you know? So that's what I was like, that's another thought I've had when I watched the film. Like, I was like, my friends would never let me go do this procedure.
Yeah.
Like, the risk is too high. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think too. Like, what is it about community that helps us grieve in a way versus like doing it in isolation,
Well, and I think sometimes good friends will also steer you away from bad relationships as well if you let them.
I mean, we try. Sometimes we fail, but we definitely try. The good ones try. So,
and so there's kind of a B plot that I think we ought to discuss at least for a couple minutes, which is the let's see, I'm going to make sure I get the name right. Patrick, Elijah Wood's character. So he's a technician at Lacuna, and he, is attracted to Clementine and uses her memories, and specifically like journals and things she's left behind, to like try to take advantage of her or start a relationship. I don't know that he would say he was taking advantage, but that's what he's doing. And he tries to like sort of take memory. So she'll write about something that Joel did that was very meaningful to her, very romantic, and he just steals it and tries to do it to her, And so I think particularly in this kind of era we're in of, Me Too and this discussion about what consent really means, where I think there was maybe a very simple definition that we'd had that we're starting to maybe question whether it's sufficient. So, maybe to put it very straightforwardly, if there's not really legitimate informed consent and he's taking advantage of this, is this like a form of rape ultimately?
I mean, one, we don't know if they've slept together. Maybe they have. But I think either way, he is leveraging power that she doesn't realize that he has to coax her into some sort of sexual relationship with her. You know what I mean? Or with him. And I think like his strategy is pretty awful in my opinion. Like he's using her memories. And what's interesting is like he tries to set himself up. Like there's a scene where she takes him out to that frozen lake, which she takes Joel out to, and he literally says like the exact same lines as Joel says to her in this memory she shared as a good memory, and she just doesn't care. Like, she doesn't respond to him. He in some ways they're using each other. Like, he's using her like memories to be with her, and she's using him as kind of just a presence because she's feeling lost and disconnected, and she wants to have a body, I think, close by. And so like they're using each other, but it's like it's not working. Like, she doesn't desire him, you know. She just desires, she wants company, but she wants specific company that she can't seem to find. And even this guy who's like doing all the same things as the other guy did that she loved, it's not panning out. And so I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. It's hard to say because we don't see the relationship really manifest physically between them. But if, I don't know, if he's tricking her into sleeping with him, then it's definitely abuse. It's a leveraging of power. I mean, I think that's definitely what you could say. It's an abusive partnership in that he is taking advantage of her without her knowing. You know, it would be akin to roofing somebody maybe, or, you know what I mean? Just like, but he's doing it emotionally, you know? So yeah, I wouldn't want that to happen to me.
Oh yeah. Well, and you know, there's kind of the trope of the sensitive nice guy who's insecure and can't seem to get a date. Right. And I think is sort of trying, you know, presenting himself as that, but there's something kind of dishonest and slimy, even if there's a part of you that wants to pity him because he's obviously a sad little insecure guy. I mean, and you know, it's just not, it's not cool. It's not appropriate because he's not treating her as a human being. He's seeing her as an end to some goal that he's trying to further for himself.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I just don't have a lot of patience for dishonesty in a relationship. You know, I rather have somebody to say what's hard and true. And I think that is ultimately kinder than, like, you know, just being dishonest with a partner. I just don't have a lot of patience for it anymore. I didn't really ever to begin with, but even more so now. Yeah.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, we're kind of at like the end of my notes, and we're getting kind of near the hour mark, and I don't want to keep you for longer than is necessary. I really appreciate you making the time to do this. Totally. Are there any things that you'd kind of want to wrap up with on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think just mostly I would like to say, because I am a musician, I think this is like, besides the Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley, this is, and I also really loved Interstellar. This is one of my favorite scores of a movie of all time. And for other musician lovers, check out John Bryan. I think he's brilliant. I love the song that Beck wrote for the film. Change your heart. And it's just so good. It's so good. And there's a song on the soundtrack that we don't hear in the version of the film, but it's on the soundtrack. And it's a song called Strings Attached to You. And John Bryan actually sings on the track, and there's lyrics. We hear the melody in different ways throughout the film with different instruments, but we never really hear the sung version. And I think it's like the words are beautiful. And I would just encourage anybody who loves music and loves scoring to check out the score, because it's one of those scores. I have it in some of my playlists still. And when like those one called Elephant Parade, that's just like an acoustic guitar doing gung, 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 like that kind of repeated melody refrain. And it immediately takes me somewhere, you know? And I just have so much respect for the soundtrack of this film. And I think it's also one of the reasons, in combination with Michel Gondry's like whimsical, dreamy directing style and Charlie Kaufman's perfect script and wonderful performances by the actors. It's all the right ingredients in the pot, you know, working together to make it tasty.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't tend to talk about the score very much when we do these films, but then again, I'm not a musician. But there's definitely those movies where the score kind of makes the film. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for making time to do this. And we've had Latifah Alattas here, and and just real quick, best website or best way for people to contact you again or find more about you.
Yeah, I think if you want to go to LatifahAlattas.com, that will take you to like all my creative works, you know, Motospira, Page 6VI, Solo Me, Autumn Film, like records I've produced. It's all like hubbed there. And then you can kind of like go down the meandering path of like, oh, what's this project? So LatifahAlattas.com actually might be the best spot.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and we didn't mention Solo Me, but that was, I think, kind of how I became more aware of you. And that,
really? Okay.
Yeah, and that's a worthwhile thing for people to check out in and of itself.
It's a really cool record. We worked together. I mean, I only worked with the guys for like 4 or 5 days, and it was really fun to be a part of. It's funny, I don't think of it as a band because I just was really the voice on this record that Derek wrote and Josh mixed and produced. So I feel like I kind of came in last minute, and we never did any, like, Derek and I toured for a short season and we did one of the songs. But I just think of it more as like a record I got to be a voice on. And so I always feel like an imposter when I say it's like a band I was part of.
No, I mean, your voice in a lot of ways makes that record, though, because, I mean, it really is the emotional heart of it and sort of is communicating what's going on. And I love, concept albums. So we're talking about the role of music and narrative in these films.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, this whole machine intelligence that's sort of coming awake is a fantastic album. I've listened to it so many times.
Yeah, it's a really worthwhile conversation too, man. So it was really brilliantly constructed. I will say that.
Awesome. Yeah. So I recommend everybody check that out as well. And thank you so much for listening. Have a good one.